I win and you give in, right? You guys know those people. Don't look at them if they're sitting next to you. I will fight and I will argue until you say uncle. It's my way or the highway. You have to win every time. Now, if that's you, do me a favor. Look around and make sure no one's looking at you. Circle that. Circle that. Notice the next one. Others of you are no way people. There's no way you're going to get me into a fight. There's no way that we're going to do this. I back away from all conflict. I withdraw from all conflict. I ignore the problems. I avoid the conflict at all costs because I would rather keep the relationship calm than deal with the issue. How many of you guys like that? Like me. I'll be the one to admit it. Anybody else? One other person. The rest of you guys don't want to conflict with me, all right? That's okay. The third way of solving problems is this: your way. Your way. Some of you are your way resolvers. That means I always give in. I want your approval so badly that I will roll over and play dead, right? There you are, right there in the front row. One of the funny stories I have from my kids growing up is that we used to call my daughter Joy, her name is Joy, we used to call her Possum because Joshua would always come up to her when she was little and pick on her and push her down. And what she would do is just lay there on the ground until he went away. And she wouldn't move. So we called her Possum. The result of that was one day she crawled up on the table. I'm not kidding. She crawled up on the table. And he was sitting there watching TV. She stood up. She grabbed him by the hair and fell over. She took that kid down. There's another way that we resolve issues, and that's this: halfway. That's where we'll compromise. It's not better than the other three, but it is a little bit better, okay? It's not as great as the next one, but it's a little bit better than the other three. This is where we win some and we lose some, where we have to give in, to give a little, and so that's kind of some of us today. Circle that if that's you. The next one is this, and then I think it's one of the better ways. It's our way. Our way is when we work out our mutual goals together, where we can talk about the relationship, we can focus on a single issue, and we value the relationship over the fight. You know what I'm talking about. Some of you value the chance to win the fight and end up losing the war. It makes sense? You guys know what I'm talking about if you've ever been married, okay? This morning, I know that some of you are kind of frustrated with your marriage. You would like to go to another level. Some of you might be perfectly happy with your marriage, and we're all glad for you. But there's some of us who need to work on it a little more. And so I hope that you would just follow me this morning. Well, how do we pull together when we've been pulling apart for so long? Okay, what is it going to take to get our marriage better? I wanted you to notice this. I'm going to give you 6 things this morning. The first one is this: you ask God to help. Write that down, all you married people. Write that down. You ask God to help. You pray about it before you go and talk to your friends about it. How many of you ever had some friends who would come to work and you'd all gather around and they start talking negatively about their spouse? Isn't that true? And they pick out which spouse is the worst, right? Well, my spouse did this and my spouse did that. Well, one of the things that you're going to need to do is to learn how to not do that. Instead of talking to other people about your spouse, you learn to talk to God about your spouse. God, I'm having a difficult time in this area of our marriage. God, I'm having a difficult time in this area of our relationship with that friend or that loved one. God, I need your help. Why is that, guys? Because we cannot do it on our own. Now, you will never have a marriage that God wants you to have until you get this first point down, this first point resolved. A relationship with God. God, help me to have that relationship with you so that I can have a relationship with others. And you might be a person that doesn't care about God, and that could be you this morning, but you will never become the person you were created to be until you understand that the Creator has a plan for your life and a plan for your marriage. Now, think about this. In James chapter 4, verse 2 on our outline, it says this: you quarrel and you fight. You do not have because you do not ask God. Now, there's been times in my marriage when I just had to go to God and say, God, this isn't working, me fighting and arguing about this situation. So, God, I'm just going to give it to you. And, God, I pray that you would help Jennifer to see where I'm coming from. You guys picked up on that. Good. One of the things that I learned about prayer is this. God will either change your heart or he will change the other person's heart. And a lot of the times, it's our heart that needs to change. God, I'm very upset. I'm very bitter about this situation in my life. God, change my heart. Maybe that needs to be your prayer this morning. Well, notice, you don't have because you do not ask God. Now, this is the foundation of working on your marriage. You have to have God on your team in order for it to become everything that you want it to be. Now, notice this. There's a second thing I want to share with you. When you are quarreling and you have an unmet need and you're thinking that God is not going to help you, well, I want you to think about this. When you don't ask God for help and you're thinking that that person is going to supply all of your needs, well, in reality, what you have just done is made that person the thing you worship. Does that make sense? If you're looking to somebody else to meet all of your needs, which they cannot do because they're human and they sin and we've all sinned and fallen short of God's glory. If you're looking for that person to solve everything, then that person has become your God. Well, the Bible says that only God can meet all of our needs. You know, there's something that happens when we decide that we're going to let other people meet our needs. It's this, anger. Anger results because you think that that person should be doing everything for you, and as a result you become angry and bitter because it doesn't happen. Now, how many of you ladies, how many of you men know, let me just start this, how many of you men know that you married a sinner? Raise your hand. Okay. Now, ladies, how many of you know that you married a bigger one? Okay, you guys know that, right? That's just the truth. If we're going to get our life on track, we've got to ask God for help. God, help this relationship. Notice number 2. Not only do I ask God for help, I've got to realize that I have a part in the problem. I've never met a marriage that it was all one person's fault. I've heard a lot of stories about how it was one person's fault, but I've never met a marriage who did an honest evaluation, who couldn't recognize that they were part of the problem. I want you to notice this passage in Matthew chapter 7. Jesus uses a bit of Hebrew humor on us, and usually we don't get Hebrew humor because it's kind of exaggerated, but I want you to get this as he says this. He says, why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's contact, but you don't notice the log in your own eye? You guys know what I'm talking about? It's easy to point the other finger, right? It's easy. It's all their problem. And they got that speck in their eye. They got that little thing that just drives you over the edge so many times throughout the day. And then he says this. He said, why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye when you don't notice this huge log coming out of your eye? He goes, you got a bit of sawdust in your eye, but you got a telephone in your eye, telephone pole in your eye. He says this, hypocrite, first take out the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. Jesus came along and he said other things that were kind of funny. He said things like this. It's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to go to heaven. He said something like this about religious people. He says, you know what? They strain at a gnat and they swallow the camel. And he's like, you know what? It's kind of a joke to say there's a problem with that person's eye, and yet we've got all these issues that we're so unwilling to work on. And so we've got to realize that we have a part in the problem. Now, one of the big things that's happening today in Hollywood is there's a lot of divorces. Have you noticed that? It just seems to be getting worse. I don't know why that is. But one of the things that they state as a reason for this is, let me see if I can say this right, irreconcilable, someone help me out.
Irreconcilable differences.
Okay, you know what I'm talking about. Irreconcilable differences, blah, blah. Let me just ask you something honest. How many of you know of a marriage that doesn't have that problem? Every marriage has irreconcilable differences, right? Blah, blah. Learn to speak later. Every marriage has that problem. You know, Jennifer likes to save money. I like to spend money. And that's a problem sometimes, right? Jennifer likes to be on time most of the time, right? However, I will see you when I show up, right? These types of things cause problems.